I'd like to talk a little bit about trigger words with gangstalking and harassment, organized harassment, and any kind of uh, any kind of ordeal like this. One thing that gets repeated in almost every case, if not every single case of gang stalking, including mine, is something called trigger words. Trigger words are just words which are used in the same way that uh, other things which other things which are used in conjunction with anchoring are used, and in the same way that certain everyday, ordinary objects or sounds can be anchored to a feeling, words can be used this way as well. And words are just as effective as objects and sounds when used with anchoring, but they can even be more effective. And no matter uh, what case of gang stalking we're talking about, there's always going to be some use of trigger words, and you will notice these words get repeated, and they get repeated seemingly independently in independent situations where you wouldn't know how these independent sources would be using the same word in conjunction, but it happens. And to give an example of this, you may, at the beginning of an experience of gang stalking, you may notice that certain words get repeated to you or in your vicinity often. You may overhear someone speaking about you and they may use a certain word. Usually it's derogatory in nature. Sometimes it's mildly derogatory, and it could be very passive aggressive, something that you couldn't pick out immediately and necessarily call them out on it and confront them about it, but it's something that is passive aggressively derogatory towards you. And it could be each individual case is going to have their own specific personal trigger words, and you will notice that at some point in your experience, you'll start to see people around you, may even in direct conversation with you. For example, if you were at work talking to someone who is an acquaintance, a neighbor, you'll start to notice that these words get used constantly. And one thing that will help you notice that this particular word may be being used as a trigger is that you'll notice that there's some derogatory element to it, or it may refer to something personal about you, but it will be something that you may have never heard before in your life. You may have only heard it obscurely, but all of a sudden it seems like 15 people in your vicinity or in your workplace or somewhere at some point, somewhere in your vicinity or in your day-to-day life, you start to notice that the same word comes up constantly, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, and it just gets repeated over and over by these people. And if you are able to, if you're able to recognize it, you will, once you hear it again, you'll start to sort of be able to understand that it is in fact being used in this way. But if you're very early into the experience of being a targeted person and you're being gang stalked, it can, in the same way that these other tools are used, it can cause you to change how you feel about yourself. Even someone who's strong-minded can be affected by this if they don't know what it is. And oftentimes you'll notice that it gets used intentionally within earshot of you. It's not as though it's not as though it's a common word to be repeated in this fashion. For example, you may notice that suddenly people are referring to you as a klutz. They may use the word klutz over and over and over, and these people seem to be independent of each other. So you start to see yourself as a klutz. And it's really another form of programming. It's getting you to see yourself in a different way. Think of yourself as a klutz, for example. Now, in my case, that is not the particular word that has been used on me. If I could give a personal example of my own trigger word that has been used on me, and it almost sounds comical to say, and in a lot of ways it's not overtly offensive, but it has been used in a passive-aggressive way, would be the word buddy. This word buddy, until this experience started, I've never been called buddy in my life, ever. Maybe once or twice, randomly by people, ever. But once this started, suddenly everybody, probably 15 people at least, independent of each other, began referring to me. When I would run into them in public, they would say, "Hey, buddy." And it was very strange because I've never been called that before, and suddenly everyone's calling me buddy. And this is probably several weeks into this experience, fairly early on. So you may start to notice this early in the experience. But if you analyze the word itself, just like these other techniques, the object or the thing taken in an isolated incident is not in and of itself very offensive, but it's used in a very organized way and in a repeated way to think of a death by 1,000 paper cuts. It's used over and over and over. Once or twice you wouldn't notice it, but if 20 people suddenly start calling you buddy, or they say, "Hey sport, hey, how's it going, bud," or it's kind of like something you would call Opie Taylor on the Andy Grid. It's like, "Hey," like you're a little kid, or like it's kind of a demeaning thing to say, but it's not so overt that you would just immediately be up in arms over it. It's not like calling someone a moron or something like that. So it's something, usually the key word is going to be something that they can get away with saying in public without looking like they're being offensive to you, but you will be able to recognize it as being passive aggressive. And again, this will be repeated so many times, and you'll start to hear it so often around you that it will become obvious that it's being used as just another psychological tool in the bag, just like any of these other tools are used. And if you are a targeted person, you've been through gang stalking, you know what this is about, and you know how it feels to start to recognize or hear these words used over and over. But like all of these other things, it's just very important that you recognize it for what it really is. Do not take it to heart. Look at it for what it's being used for, and that's very important. So I thought I should make a video on that because it is part of this experience.